Following the NCAA wrestling championships where they started off at 197, we had the 5 weights go on, and then obviously Penn State had their 5 straight weights where they had a guy in the finals and they won all the 5 weights. It seemed like Penn State couldn't really get any better news than that. Having 5 champions, having a guy in Nick Soriano who could have competed for a championship at 125. It seems like their roster's stacked enough as it is. And then news came that Gavin Teasdale, who projects to be a 133-pounder, was committed to the University of Iowa. He came in right alongside Spencer Lee, and it seemed like it was going to be a great 1-2 punch for Iowa. Well, now Gavin Teasdale is decommitted from Iowa and is now going to Penn State. Likely is going to fill a weight class at 133 that didn't even have a qualifier this year. Now, he won't be there next year. He'd be there the year after, and that's if he isn't redshirting his freshman year at that. But again, it makes Penn State only stronger, and it kind of brought up a lot of questions. So for wrestling, their recruitment's been a little bit different than football, basketball, and a lot of other sports in the past, and now that's kind of changed a bit to the point where you can start recruiting juniors as opposed to having to wait until their senior year. Gavin Teasdale had made his commitment as a sophomore. He seemed like he was a pretty big Iowa wrestling fan as a kid. He's obviously from Pennsylvania. He had taken some camps with Terry Brands and had made his commitment after that, but it seems as though whether it's friendships with guys like Jason Nolf, who's the national champion for Penn State, or whatever it is, talking to Cale Sanderson, he's decided that he now wants to go to Penn State. And it brought up a big question in the community as far as whether we should be angry at him for committing to one team and then changing his commitment. Should you be angry at Iowa for maybe not still constantly recruiting him until he officially signed and just taking the verbal commitment for what it is? A lot of different opinions on that. Jordan Burroughs seemed pretty upset about it. He felt like Cale Sanderson was being a little shysty in how he was handling that, where even though Teasdale had already committed to Iowa, he was still recruiting him. He was upset that the commitment of saying, yes, I'm going to the University of Iowa wasn't upheld by Teasdale. Now, a lot of things here. First off, everyone likes to say this, and it's fair to an extent, where it's like Teasdale's a kid, you really don't want to dig at him too much. And I mean, I don't know that I totally buy that argument, because again, if you're saying they're a kid, don't be too harsh on them. Well, this is a guy who wrestles in front of big crowds nationally. He's looking to go into college where he's going to be wrestling in front of big groups of people nationally. I mean, if we don't think it's normal for a kid to be ripped on the internet where he can just kind of shut his laptop, what do we think is going to happen when he goes into Carver Hawkeye Arena and gets booed by 15,000 people? I mean, he's in a position where he's going to have to deal with a lot of heat, so getting a little bit of trash online isn't the worst thing. That being said, all he really said is that he is now committing to the Penn State University. I don't actually know what made him change his mind and why he's no longer going to Iowa, and if you don't know the why, it's hard to really dig into him and say that he's wrong. There is some level where even if you verbally come in and say, yes, this is where I'm going to do it, this is my word. Look, if things happen, things happen. I mean, 50% of marriages end up in divorce. A lot of times things seem rosy and then something changes and then you realize, okay, maybe this isn't the best fit. I don't know if him leaving Iowa had anything to do with something that Iowa did. I found it kind of odd that after, or even leading up to the end of the tournament, there was a lot of talk about culture at the University of Iowa, whether it was Thomas Gilman, Corey Clark, even Terry Brands had talked about it, where they were saying that the culture is a lot better than it was. I don't know what that's implying about what the culture was in the past. They were saying there's still more work to do, so what does that mean about the culture now? Maybe at the time that Teasdale had committed, he thought that everything would be rosy, but then he learned something else that we, on the larger scale, don't know. And if that's the case, you can kind of understand maybe why he'd have to switch commitments. Obviously, again, if he's making friends with the guys on the team at Penn State and everything seems rosy there, maybe that's where he wants to go too. I don't know what his reasons are, so to dig at him personally it'd be unfair, because obviously I don't know enough to know whether or not he's at fault here. But it does paint the larger question as far as recruiting goes, whether verbal commitments, what they mean anymore. If that's just kind of like a stopgap where it's like, yeah, this guy did commit to another team, but we can still talk to him and still see if we can change his mind last second. Seems a little bit dirty, but again, until they're signed on paper, they're not technically signed. It's just the verbal commitment. It's just kind of, the verbal commitment almost is like a marriage thing where it's like 50% of the people who verbally commit end up changing it later. So even if somebody does commit to your team, you still got to keep recruiting them. You still got to keep pushing forward and hope that they stay there. And an interesting thing that came out later that night when he had decommitted was Willie Saylor from Flow had mentioned that it looked as though Roman Bravo Young, who had committed to Penn State, was now interested in changing to Iowa. That hasn't been officially officially reported on yet. He hasn't officially come out and said that, but that'd be pretty interesting to see how after Gavin Teasdale left Iowa, there were a lot of Iowa fans who were really pissed about people decommitting and all that. And it'll be interesting to see how quick that changes if Roman Bravo Young decommits from Penn State and then goes to Iowa. Roman Bravo Young, again, for this being an MMA show, this is a very specific wrestling recruiting thing, so if I'm going to have to tie this back, Roman Bravo Young has trained with Greg Jackson's camp in the past. He's worked with John Jones. The picture I have in this video, if you're watching on YouTube right now, is him with Holly Holm. But I believe he's a 4-time state champion in Arizona, top recruit. He's a guy who's been penciled in either at 33 or 41, depending on what roster he's on. So if he ends up coming to Iowa went from having what looked like a great 1-2 punch in the future of having Spencer Lee and Gavin Teasdale. If you switch that up and now it's Spencer Lee and Roman Bravo Young, I don't think you can be too mad if you're a Hawkeye fan. That's still a great 1-2 punch to have. Both of those guys have the potential to win a national title at some point, if not multiple national titles, especially with the success Iowa's had in the past at their 25 and 33 weight classes, whether it's with your Matt McDonough's, your Dan Dennis, Tony Ramos, Corey Clark, Thomas Gilman, you name it. So it'll be good to see what those guys can bring in the future, and interesting to see how wrestling recruiting changes now with all these early commitments. And it'll be also interesting to see now that Penn State has all these champions who have a few more years of eligibility left, are the top recruits going to still want to go to Penn State and sit behind them, or are they going to start getting spread around and then maybe in a couple of years Penn State isn't the powerhouse it is now? It'll be fun to see.